1521. Tenochtitlan falls to Hernán Cortés. Inside the ruins, his soldiers find a bitter royal drink, chocolatl, ground cacao mixed with chili and spice, once reserved for Aztec kings and warriors. The Spanish carry the beans home. They add sugar. Within a century, chocolate is standard at every royal court in Europe. But European demand outpaces what small Mesoamerican farms can supply. The Spanish crown answers with the encomienda system, forced indigenous labor, legally sanctioned, expanding fast across new plantations. The ritual drink of gods needs a workforce that cannot say no. By 1600, cacao is no longer sacred. It is cargo. By the 1600s, cacao is no longer confined to Mexico. Spanish and Portuguese planters push cultivation into the Caribbean, into Venezuela, into Brazil, chasing the same demand driving sugar. The two crops share more than soil. They share ships. The same vessels crossing the Atlantic carrying enslaved Africans to the Americas return loaded with cacao and sugar, bound for European markets. By 1700, an estimated hundreds of thousands of enslaved people work cacao and sugar plantations across the Americas combined. Chocolate houses open in London, Paris, Madrid. Nobody sipping there asks who picked the beans. The receipt never says. Birmingham, England. William Cadbury inherits a chocolate company built on Quaker values, temperance, fair wages, opposition to slavery. His cocoa comes from a Portuguese island, São Tomé. Reports reach him that plantation workers there are recruited under contract, then never allowed to leave. Cadbury sends an investigator. It takes 6 years. The findings confirm forced labor, workers dying far from home, no wages ever paid out. Cadbury keeps buying São Tomé cocoa the entire time the investigation runs. In 1909, the company finally switches suppliers. By then, thousands of workers are already gone. Washington, D.C. Congress threatens a labeling law. Certify your chocolate slave-free or face it blocked from U.S. shelves. The industry panics, then negotiates. The result is the Harkin-Engel Protocol, a voluntary pledge to end the worst child labor by 2005. That deadline passes. So does the next one, and the next. Today, an estimated 1.56 million children still work cocoa farms across Ivory Coast and Ghana. In 2021, 6 former child laborers sue Nestle and Cargill directly. The Supreme Court rules against them, 9-0. The companies broke no promise anyone could enforce. Bristol, England. J.S. Fry & Sons presses cocoa butter, sugar, and chocolate liqueur into a solid bar, the first of its kind. Within decades, Cadbury, Nestle, and an American named Milton Hershey turned chocolate from a rich man's drink into an everyday product for millions. Hershey builds an entire company town in Pennsylvania around his factory. Houses, schools, a trolley system, all funded by cocoa. The supply chain feeding this new industrial machine never changes. It still runs through the same West African plantations, the same low wages, the same colonial trade routes drawn a century earlier. In the 1970s, cocoa made up half the value of a chocolate bar. Farmers got a real share. Then, in the 1980s, global cocoa prices collapsed, falling by half within a decade. The farmers' share kept shrinking anyway. By the 1990s, it was down to 16%. Today, it sits around 6%. Traders, processors, brands, and retailers absorbed the difference. The bar in the store costs about the same as it always did. What changed is who gets paid and how much. A Ghanaian cocoa farmer now earns roughly $1 a day. His counterpart in Ivory Coast earns less. Ivory Coast splits into civil war, rebel North against government South. Cocoa taxes fund both sides. A 2007 investigation finds government forces skimming cocoa export revenue directly into weapons purchases. The country produces 40% of the world's cocoa. Every chocolate bar sold that year touches this money somewhere along its route. In 2010, disputed elections spark renewed violence. Over 3,000 people die. International buyers keep purchasing beans through the conflict, unable to trace which farms, which taxes, which side. The chocolate on store shelves carries no warning label for any of this. In response, the industry built certification. Fair Trade, Rainforest Alliance, organic seals appear on wrappers starting in the 1990s. A farmer selling certified beans can earn up to 30% more per pound. It sounds like a fix. But by 2022, fair trade cocoa still accounts for less than 5% of global production. Certification costs money farmers rarely have up front. Demand for certified chocolate stays a niche, premium market, mostly in wealthy countries. 95% of the world's cocoa moves through the same uncertified system it always has. The seal exists. Almost nobody's cocoa actually carries it. Cocoa prices hit their highest point in 60 years, nearly $13,000 a ton. Traders call it historic. But farmers in Ivory Coast and Ghana are locked into fixed government prices set months earlier. They miss the entire spike. Then, in 2026, the market crashes, falling more than 75% within a year. Governments cut guaranteed prices again to cope. A farmer today earns roughly half the world benchmark rate, whichever direction prices move. The chocolate industry just lived through its most volatile 2 years on record. For the people growing the beans, almost none of it changed anything. There's another cost, harder to see from a store shelf. Ivory Coast has lost more than 85% of its forest cover since 1960, most of it cleared for cocoa. In 2017, major chocolate companies pledged to stop sourcing from protected forests. 3 years later, an environmental watchdog measured 47,000 hectares cleared in a single year, inside cocoa-growing regions specifically. Their own assessment was blunt. Commitments made, monitoring never honored. Poor farmers, paid fractions of a cent per bean, expand into national parks because there's simply no other way to grow more crop. The forest pays for the shortfall too. Add it up. 500 years since the first forced cacao harvest. A century since Cadbury kept buying anyway. 25 years since a protocol promised change and missed every deadline. 2 decades of certification covering a sliver of the market. A civil war partly funded by export taxes. A price crash and a price spike, neither one reaching the farmer. A forest disappearing, one plantation at a time. Different decades, different actors, different headlines. The same basic shape repeating. Somebody profits, somebody absorbs the cost. And somewhere, a wrapper gets printed, promising something sweet, saying none of this out loud. You're holding that same piece of chocolate again. Nothing about it has changed. Same sweetness, same wrapper, same shelf price. But you now know its root. A sacred Aztec drink, a Spanish conquest, a forced labor plantation, a chocolate baron who kept buying anyway, a protocol that missed 4 deadlines, a war partly funded by export taxes, a price crash that never reached the farmer, a forest quietly disappearing behind it all. Somewhere in West Africa right now, a cocoa pod is being cut open by hand. The wrapper in your hand doesn't mention any of this. It never has.